what we're seeing in terms of its impact on the economy, the marketplace, and how corporations are responding. So for those who are interested, maybe feeling a little overwhelmed, maybe feeling a little anxious about what's going to happen in this election year, join us for the conversation. All right. Welcome, listeners. We are in another presidential election year, and this one, I'm sure this has been said in previous years, but this one is shaping up to be the most contentious one yet. And so for our listeners on today's podcast and program, we're not talking about who we voted for or who we're planning to vote for this coming November, but we're talking about the sentiment of political extremism in the U.S. and the impact that we see it having on the overall economy, as well as corporate America, how the companies in the U.S. are responding to it. So let's go ahead and dive in. Jeremiah, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think some of these political, when you say extremism, we're talking about just these political items that are so meaningful in our community. So some of these items, like say abortion,
immigration.
So some people, immigrants, people who vote simply on that topic, and they feel very, very passionately about that one item. And there's many of them. I mean, abortion's a big one. Immigration's another. Inflation is an important one at the moment. Healthcare and healthcare delivery, international power and international presence. I mean, all these are some really extreme items. And I would like to say that wow, we've never been more divided. We are so different in our views of the country and the echo chambers that you get from Facebook and social media. But as we're talking and ready for this, I mean, we've had a number of different elections over the years that have been very hotly contested and had different issues at play.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a little bit, and we'll touch base in here, but we talked about the Gore versus Bush election and the hanging Chads, bring us all back to Florida for those memories. Then also Ford versus Carter and kind of what was going on in that generation. That in America, contested and extreme elections are not this novelty. I feel like we have a lot. We've had a lot of those.
So the question is go ahead.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, but the emotions that people are feeling, we're all just so excited to talk about this topic. The emotions that people are feeling, albeit they may not be new, like they've happened in the past, but they are real, and I wanted to start us off by Reuters put out a survey recently. I thought this was an interesting statistic that 21% of the respondents in a 3-day poll said that political extremism or threats to democracy was the biggest problem facing the U.S. And just kind of second to that were those who are concerned about the economy and those who are concerned about immigration. So it's a very real fear and concern, and that extremism is it's real. So
again, I would reinforce the fact that it is easier for people right now to get reinforcement of their bias. So what the internet has provided, and right now with social media, with all the avenues and all the places that you can go, you have a tendency, and of course the people that run this, we're talking about all the big internet providers, they know what you like, and they can continue to feed you information that reinforces your bias. Instead of giving you a more balanced view, give you an alternative view, they give you a reinforcement of your narrow view, which I think creates more extremism, right?
Absolutely. Like, talk about failure by association. I mean, continue to connect with your friends online, but the data that's being collected creates the logarithm. They continue to feed you the same content that it seems that you and or your friends or those that are your sphere of influence also are interested in, and that has an impact absolutely on extremism.
And I think with that, what the element that I see in that extremism is it reinforces your bias, but it also makes you question someone who is not being fed that same group of information. How could anyone, believe something different? Right. Everything I see in my feed, everyone I talk to believes this. Therefore, whoever is out there who believes the opposite of me, they're crazy. They're, name the derogatory comment, but it's the us and them. It's the us that have it all figured out. We are reading all the right facts. We understand it. And it's the them that I don't even know anybody, who's going to vote that way. I don't even know anybody who believes this. And I think that's a big piece of it too, that we get in our own echo chambers and through, I think, partly through social media, but other things as well. But I think it degrades the dialogue with the other side to say, yeah, my neighbor is a very reasonable person, and we want to talk through this together. Versus, wow, I found out that they're politically this. I can't believe it. I thought they were smart. They're not. Oh, that mentality that there's an us and them, and I don't think that's, again, new, but I do think it's more than it's been in the past.
Yeah, and I think that at the bottom line is that we're all Americans, and so as we are in this family, so to speak, this American family, you're going to have differences of views, but will the views be so extreme that you're willing to divide not only that relationship, but also to fight that other side? And there's been times in our history that that's happened, going back to Revolutionary War times. I mean, reading some of the comments and the articles back and forth between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, they were about as extreme as you could possibly be. And the articles in the newspapers that were brought up and kind of the editorials at that time, they didn't hold any punches. I mean, they did not hold any punches. So we've had the elements of this right from the very onset of our country, and it's kind of the fabric of it goes all the way through. And the question is, did America fail? We've had over 200 years of this. Did we fail? Did we become weaker or did we become stronger? And we've always zeroed in on something. We've always zeroed in on something that affected us personally, either our spiritual views, our financial views, our emotional views, whatever they are, we all have these things. And what we've seen historically, these haven't diminished. They haven't got less. In fact, if anything, they've become at least as excited now as they were 200 plus years ago.
Right. Right. I think to argue the point, Jeremiah, that the divide has already been there, but it might have deepened more recently. Information travels so much faster than it did 200 years ago. And then not to mention that people think that they're coming into this with an open mind, but really they're being fed a certain bias based on, the internet logarithms. And so just coming into this climate that we're in, I think it takes a moment just to recognize what are all the input factors that are contributing to the extremism that we're seeing. But I like your point, Dad. We're all still Americans. There is a family sentiment, albeit sometimes dysfunctional, but we are collected under that same nationalism, I guess.
Correct.
Yeah, that's right. And part of what we want to talk about today, and maybe it's a good moment, is the economy, of how this impacts businesses, how this impacts policy, taxes, how this impacts real people's pocketbooks. And one item that we like to, what I want to talk about today is kind of the last election that we most recently had, 2020, and how much, and Laura, you'd brought this up previously, of how much companies, I think, felt forced to speak out on certain items.
Yep.
Whether it's a certain group that has to have more rights, or a certain group that has to have less rights. I feel like there's a lot of just not just in the political system, but in just the general sense of businesses are feeling they have to have a voice on X, on Twitter, on social media, but just putting out a statement to say, hey, we support this group, we support that group, which now becomes political. And you have some people who love that, some who don't. And I think we saw a lot of that in 2020. Yep. I don't know how much we'll see in 2024. There's been a lot of pushback.
I think there's been a big shift. Let's just turn back time just 4 years ago. In 2020, we obviously had COVID and new vaccines trying to be launched as quickly as possible. We had the Black Lives Matter movement. We had, the response of the community towards corporations of all sizes was that there wasn't any hiding. You had to come out with some sort of statement. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't have a political or a social statement, they used their purchasing power against you. So companies suffered. Those who tried to kind of hide, during 2020, they actually suffered. I think there was a lot more push just to say something. And of course, the larger corporations, they had to make really broad statements. And you and I were talking earlier today about it'll be interesting to see what impact that has on those companies over time. But here we are in 2024, and I observe and was reading about kind of the opposite trend, that companies feel like I had to come out with some sort of statement in 2020. Maybe in 2024, we can kind of sit back a little bit and sort of watch what's happening.
And I think their response, in fact, there's an article that talked about the major investment firms, from BlackRock to Blackstone to Vanguard and all these different fidelities, and how they've responded to what they refer to as ESG, which stands for environment, social, and governance. And some of the statements that they made a couple of years ago, what they found is that their investor core was saying, no, we don't want you to take that extreme view. And so the investors are saying, we will pull back from that. So that means that the influence on the individual investors coming through pensions and such as that, it weaves its way through the economy and it gets to the decision makers in these boardrooms. And these boardrooms are saying, we don't want to necessarily take this extreme view, but at the same point in time, we don't want to be on the other side of the spectrum and saying we're opposed to this or we're against that or we're in favor of that. What we want to do is be correct. And of course, their correctness means they want to have more profit. More profit means they're going to make decisions based upon their capability to run the company successfully. That's going to go from the board of directors all the way up to the president and the people that run the company and make those decisions. Those people have to make a profit. If they don't, they're going to get fired. So there's a survival aspect to this whole thing that comes down what is best for the company, which works back to us as investors. Mm-hmm. As investors, we want to know that these people that are running these companies, are they making good decisions? Are they practical about what they're doing? I don't want some company that I'm investing in going out and ruining the environment. I don't want some company I'm investing in going out and saying, I'm for killing babies. Mm-hmm. On the other side, I don't want them on the other side saying, I'm against unwed mothers having children. I want them to be practical and logical going forward. And I think what you're talking about, Laura, is starting to happen. Mm-hmm. People are starting to see the extreme views and how that is damaging relationships and also is damaging the overall culture of our country.
Right. It the more extremism is pervasive in the U.S., the more instability that we're going to find in both the labor markets and the financial systems. And that's going to ultimately have an impact primarily on foreign investments. It's going to deter a lot of foreign investment in the U.S. economy as well as other factors.
Yeah. I mean, to those comments, if there was a company that came out and said, there's some hot political item and they just came out and said, we sell T-shirts. We don't we don't do this. We don't do that. We just sell T-shirts. I don't know that would even fly though. Candidly, because I think a lot of brand association branding is saying, oh, this company stands for sports, or it stands for performance, or it stands for this type of lifestyle. And if a company were to come out and say, we don't stand for any of these things, we're just T-shirts. There's some population that would say, yeah, perfect, that's me. I want to stand for that. But I wonder, I think it'd be hard in this day and age, just because we do hold these extreme views, to almost let a company off the hook, right? To say, we just make T-shirts. We don't want to be involved in this. I think, Laura, similar to 2020, your comment, I think 2024, we're going to see some of that, I would call it forced speech, but, speech that they have to take some sort of a stand on something. Maybe they find like a medium hot button, right? and go with it and say, hey, this is part of our branding. We're inclusive, or we are nationalist, or whatever it is.
So you're saying it doesn't pay to be agnostic when you're talking about corporations, right? Like it might actually benefit you to take a stance, albeit positive or in the negative. I don't support X, or these are the values of our company. I'm always a proponent of a company publicizing what their values are and staying true to those. Because I think, we vote more than just at the polls, right? Like we vote with our purchasing power. And so Americans are going to put their dollars behind a company that they align with from a values perspective.
That's right.
And I think what we're dealing with right now, I mean, what's in the forefront of us right now is that inflation is having an impact. And of course, in California here, they've raised the minimum wage for service workers up to $20 an hour. And you and I have we see the impact of that. If you go to a fast foods, go to a restaurant, anybody, you can't order a meal, and you significantly can see the difference in the increase in the cost of that versus what it was maybe 2 years ago. So I think people, going back to your comment, Laura, people are going to vote. They're going to vote by saying we choose differently because they're voting their economics. Mm-hmm. And so companies will recognize, we're going to have to make some changes. Now, will technology help to reduce the labor costs and give a higher efficiency so they can deliver a product that's more palatable to the consumer? I don't know, but I think we're going to see We just had an announcement today that Red Lobster went bankrupt. So
Mm.
obviously their pattern, their style, their business model isn't working. And so they're closing their stores, and it's going to be, there's another icon that's gone out because it wasn't adaptable. And I think more importantly, the companies that are successful are the ones that adapt, and not just to the political view,
Mm.
but they adapt to the economics. And that's why I believe in America, because America is adaptable. And that democracy is, in my opinion, is alive and well. You
Right.
take the disputes that are going on right now, if you had those same disputes in Russia, you'd end up in jail. In China, if you had those same disputes, you'd probably end up maybe disappearing. I don't know. In America, you can still stand on the streets and yell and scream, and nobody's going to kill you or throw you in jail. At least not now. Right?
So isn't that an interesting juxtaposition, though? Those companies who stay true to their values but have the ability to adapt economically, those are the ones that are going to survive the long term.
Yep.
But those who are wishy-washy on their values, trying to appeal to the current demographic, they're going to lose a huge amount of their interest as they shift their alliance between, different communities. And so I see that those larger corporations and small corporations as well, but those who come out the gates saying these are our values and that they stay true to those, and yet have the ability from a cultural perspective to adapt to what's happening economically, those are the ones that are going to survive the long term. Those are good investments.
Yeah, I mean, if you're like Berkshire Hathaway and you bought a railroad, how does a railroad come out and make a social statement or political statement about what they're doing? What's their job? Their job is to transport goods and service and commodities, right? And to do it as efficiently and effectively as they possibly can. If they came out and said, "Oh no, we're not going to do this because of this political view," everybody would look at each other going, "You're a railroad, for crying out loud. What are you doing, right?
Just be a railroad."
Be a railroad." So they're probably affected by how they use fuel. But so there's a lot of discussion right now, and there's experimentation on how do they do a better job without affecting the economy. But that becomes economically feasible for them. They still have to make a profit. They still have to be able to produce goods and bring it to the consumer at a reasonable price, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I liked your comment earlier, and as we kind of work through this, I think the idea of unity, of where we hold some of these views, these extreme views, I think there's some people who hold them higher than being an American, higher than being something else. Others, I think they hold it lower to say, well, I'm an American first. And then beyond that, I care about these political items or these social items. And I care very deeply, but I put that in a second seat to being an American. And, that's part of, I think, why, wars and other things can be so uniting for a country, because, all the extra space, to care about these other things kind of goes away, and you have to unite to the highest common denominator, in this instance. And it might just be, we're Americans, even though we disagree on all these other things, we're together Americans and we can move forward. And I don't know that our country has, a huge appetite for that outside of some extreme moments, but with this election, how wonderful would it be, right? If we took a step towards unity in the midst of caring deeply, but also for our individual items and things that we think are important, but also putting in place to say we're American first, and having the good of our country above that.
And I think it comes back to the comments that Churchill made about democracy. I mean, he looks at different forms of government, and he said democracy is sloppy, it's inefficient, it's horrible, but at the end of the day, it's the best system that we have. And it is. If you're going to be in democracy, particularly in America, you have to put up with all of the idiosyncrasies and the personal, aspects of people's opinions. And you don't, seldom do you agree with everybody's opinion. But I go back to your comment, Jeremiah. If you attack us, we all unite together really fast. And we saw that on 9/11, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. 9/11 came to mind as well as such a tragic event, but an opportunity to unite together as a country. And I think it occurs to me that, there are some philosophies that we carry with us as investors and those who oversee the investments for our clients. And the preeminence of the U.S. market over time has continued. And so we continue to invest in U.S. equities. In fact, lately, we have very little, allocation to foreign investments. It doesn't mean that they're bad options, but we just see the strength of the U.S. economy, and that continues, and we expect it to continue as well.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think even the acknowledging that the Dow hit a new high, recently, we're at some all time highs, and I think we so quickly forget the strength of the U.S. economy, of how well the businesses are doing, how much value they're creating, and how great it is the country that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And
a
that
great reminder.
doesn't mean we're not going to have some ups and downs, especially in an election year.
For
If
sure.
history repeats itself, there's going to be volatility in the market. And so, really, the second philosophy that we carry with us is stay in it for the long term.
Yep.
Those who are watching, their accounts on a day-to-day basis, they are bound to become more anxious. There are going to be ups and downs, but over the long term, the market continues to respond and offering a positive return over time. So we carry that philosophy with us as well.
Until next week, folks, may you grow in wisdom and knowledge. Thank you for listening.